morning. Welcome to our coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Entering its sixth month, I'm Amarachi Ubani. Here are the headlines. Ukraine celebrates Independence Day as Russian invasion enters sixth month. And the United States announces security package of up to $3 billion on the Independence Day. Former German Chancellor Angela Merkel awarded UNESCO Peace Prize for welcoming refugees. Welcome once again to our viewers here in Nigeria and around the world. It's Independence Day in Ukraine today. And you think that would be a celebration, but it's not. Instead of the regular military parade that would have taken place today, Ukrainian tanks are destroyed or seized from Russian forces are on display on the streets, while celebrations have been banned. There's much fear that Russia could increase strikes in cities across Ukraine, so even public events have been banned until Thursday. Residents have been advised to keep their ears open for those air raid sirens and not just hear them, but take them seriously. And it's not just Independence Day in Ukraine, it's also 6 months since the war started on February 24. Over the last few days, there have been attacks on the Russian-occupied Crimea region, talking explosions and attacks. Now, while people hunkered down indoors, President Volodymyr Zelensky has a promise for Russia. If there are strikes today, he said Ukraine would definitely respond to any manifestation of Russian terror. In the meantime, an air raid warning has already disrupted the morning quietness in the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. Remember, the government has already warned people to take them seriously, as Russia could be planning more airstrikes, especially today. Ukraine may not be celebrating its Independence Day today, but it is receiving gifts from afar. One of them is a huge $3 billion additional military aid from the United States. The White House is expected to make the announcement later today. It comes after Washington warned that Moscow could be planning strikes on major civilian targets in Ukraine around its national holiday. Military funding is expected to help Ukraine acquire weaponry, ammunition, and other supplies for its armed forces. It will be this biggest single military aid package from the United States to help Ukraine after it already provided more than $10 billion of military aid to Kyiv since the war started. Now, the UK's Downing Street has been adorned with sunflowers, some colours of the Ukrainian flag. To celebrate the Ukrainian Independence Day, the sunflower is the national flower of Ukraine. Prime Minister Boris Johnson today tweeted that the United Kingdom will continue to stand with our Ukrainian friends now and in the future. Ukraine's former President Viktor Yushchenko has praised what he describes as the power of national spirit as a key to Ukraine's independence. Speaking to the BBC in an interview, he said, "Today, 42 million Ukrainians speak in one voice, and that allows us to face the enemy, including Russia." He's a president familiar with the cost of challenging Russian influence. After all, he was poisoned with a toxic chemical while campaigning in 2004 against a Moscow-preferred candidate. He then led protests against a rigged election before taking office the following year. Mr. Yushchenko, one of the few people who predicted this war, blames what he sees now as the West's historic inability to combat Russian aggression, notably the 2008 conflict in Georgia and the annexation of Crimea 6 years later. He does, however, think Ukraine's ultimate test has changed its standing in the world, and that the more Russia tries to pull Ukraine into its orbit, the stronger its people's sense of national identity becomes. I will also tie back now to the conference on Crimea, which took place on Tuesday, mostly via video conferencing in Ukraine. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken wished Ukrainians a happy Independence Day during the platform. He also encouraged leaders to continue to put pressure on the Russian president and his enablers to end the war.
To the Ukrainian people, I know it's a day early, but on behalf of all Americans, happy Independence Day. Respect for Ukraine's independence is at the core of the Crimea platform, as is the principle that every nation's sovereignty and territorial integrity must be respected, and no country should be able to redraw another's borders by force. These principles are also at the heart of the United Nations Charter and the broader rules-based international order, which has underwritten decades of greater peace and prosperity for people around the globe. When that order is undermined anywhere, it's a threat to people everywhere. And governments willing to flout these principles in one place rarely stop there. That's what Russia's actions in Ukraine teach us. Indeed, in Crimea, we see the blueprint for much of President Putin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine on February 24th. We see it in the unelected puppets that the Kremlin is installing in Ukrainian cities it seizes to try to impose Moscow's policies, just like it did in Crimea. We see it in the sham referenda the Kremlin is organizing in regions it controls to try to legitimize its occupation, just like it did in Crimea. And we see it in the atrocities and repression by Russian forces in the territories that they besiege and control, like the extrajudicial executions, forced disappearances, torture, rape, and filtration operations that the world witnessed in Bucha and Irpin, some of which we saw and still see being perpetrated by Russian forces in Crimea. This last point is crucial. The installment of proxies and sham referenda may be in Crimea's past, but human rights abuses are an everyday reality in Crimea's present, such as the more than 40 prosecutions in Crimea documented by the United Nations between February and May of this year, targeting people who criticized the Kremlin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. One of those found guilty was a 70-year-old woman. Her crime was carrying flowers and a handmade sign that said, "No to war," to a monument of the famous Ukrainian poet, Taras Shevchenko. And such as the unrelenting crackdown of Crimea's minority ethnic and religious groups, like the recent sentencing of Crimean Tatar human rights activist Riza Isakov to 19 years in prison. All are reasons why this summit and the Crimea platform are so important. We must continue to insist that Crimea is Ukraine, just as Donetsk and Luhansk are Ukraine, just as every other part of the country is Ukraine. That was our position in 2014. It's our position in 2022. We must keep raising the costs and international pressure on President Putin and his enablers until the rights of the Ukrainian people and their sovereign country are respected. And we must continue to provide humanitarian, security, and diplomatic support for Ukrainians bravely defending their rights, as the United States has done and will continue to do. Not only for the people of Ukraine, but because when we stand up for these principles, rather than stand by, we help make people of all nations safer and more secure.
The U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, now the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, also speaking from the UK at the Crimea platform, said the Russian president has turned Crimea into an armed camp that threatens the rest of Ukraine. He says what happened in Crimea, seized and annexed by Russia in 2014, was the launchpad for the invasion on February 24. He warned that President Vladimir Putin is preparing more annexations and more sham referendum. Also, that President Putin forcibly annexed the territory of a European country and redrew a European frontier for the first time since 1945, breaking international laws.
I want to congratulate President Volodymyr Zelensky particularly for bringing us together and for focusing our attention on Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea, because that land grab in 2014 was the direct precursor of today's war. And we should have the humility to acknowledge that not everybody realized the sheer enormity of what was happening at the time. Putin forcibly annexed the territory of a European country and forcibly redrew a European frontier for the first time since 1945. He ignored the fact that Russia itself had repeatedly recognized Crimea as being part of Ukraine. And he broke so many international agreements that I can't list them all. Ever since the annexation, the people of Crimea have endured a brutal and systematic campaign of human rights abuses by the Russian authorities. Once he grabbed Crimea, Putin deployed more and more Russian forces in the peninsula, turning the territory into an armed camp from which to threaten the rest of Ukraine. And so Crimea duly became the launch pad for the invasion on the 24th of February, or one of the launch pads. And I'm afraid that all this has even greater salience today because Putin is planning to do to other parts of Ukraine, indeed all of Ukraine, what he has done to Crimea. And he is preparing more annexations and more sham referendums. And so it follows that we will never recognize Russia's annexation of Crimea or any other Ukrainian territory. In the face of Putin's assault, we must continue to give our Ukrainian friends all the military, humanitarian, economic, and diplomatic support that they need until Russia ends this hideous war and withdraws its forces from the entirety of Ukraine.
Boris Johnson, the UK Prime Minister, was staying with the virtual summit on Crimea. French President Emmanuel Macron reiterated France's support for Ukraine, saying Russia abandoned principles of international law and that France and its allies will continue to support Ukraine's fight for independence. He says France is ready to maintain the effort in the long run. We have a little bit now to the IAEA, the UN's nuclear watchdog, which is expected to visit the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in the coming days. That's if talks to gain access succeed, so says the agency. While Russia and Ukraine have repeatedly accused each other of firing at the Zaporizhzhia facility, which pro-Moscow forces took over soon after this February 24 invasion, the UN has called for the area to be demilitarized. Russia's UN ambassador, Vasily Nebenzia, told the UN Security Council on Tuesday his country is expecting the IAEA's visit to Zaporizhzhia to take place in the very near future, and Russia stands ready to extend maximum support possible to resolve all organizational issues.
We once again urge the parties to provide the IAEA mission with immediate, secure, and unfettered access to the site. Agreement is urgently needed to reestablish Zaporizhzhia as purely civilian infrastructure and to ensure the safety of the area. We must be clear that any potential damage to the plant or any other nuclear facilities in Ukraine leading to a possible nuclear incident would have catastrophic consequences not only for the immediate vicinity, but for the region and beyond. To paraphrase the Secretary General's blunt warning, any potential damage to Zaporizhzhia is suicidal.
Why on earth is a nuclear facility being used as a staging ground for war by Russian forces? These questions can only be answered by President Putin and could have been answered by members of the Russian delegation who sit here today. Only they can explain why Russia thinks it can redraw international borders by force in contravention of the UN Charter. Only they can account for the atrocities they have carried out against the Ukrainian people, bombings of schools and hospitals, the killing of aid workers and journalists, execution-style murders, and the forced deportations of Ukrainian civilians through so-called filtration operations. And only they can explain where their troops recklessly attacked and seized control of this plant, pushing us to the brink of nuclear disaster. I will recall again Ukraine's impeccable record of nuclear energy safety and security prior to Russia's seizure of this facility. But we didn't hear answers from the Russian delegation. What we heard were references to a hodgepodge of websites and tweets. And of course, that's a double-edged sword. As I would remind the Russian delegation, it was the Russian ambassador in Vienna who just a few days ago tweeted, "No mercy for the Ukrainian people." Nevertheless, a nuclear disaster at the plant is avoidable. Russia created this risk, and only Russia can defuse it. The solution is not complicated. Russia must end its unprovoked, unjustified war and withdraw its troops. And given the urgency of this situation, Russia must immediately follow the recommendation of Secretary General Guterres and establish a demilitarized zone in the area surrounding the plant. This would allow for the Ukrainian personnel, who are currently being held under duress, to operate the facility, complete a damage assessment, and restore the facility's impeccable safety, security, and safeguards performance. And a demilitarized zone would enable the IAEA team to travel to the facility, conduct an inspection, and assess the safety, security, and application of safeguards to ongoing nuclear plant operations.
Well, the Turkish President Recep Erdogan was at that meeting in Crimea, the meeting on Crimea, beg your pardon. He threw his support behind Ukraine's integrity in rejecting the illegal annexation of Crimea, saying the return of Crimea to Ukraine, of which it is an inseparable part, is essentially a requirement of international law. President Erdogan was also at the platform Tuesday. He said Ankara will continue to support the platform that was established to resolve the Crimean issue through peaceful means, again stressing that Turkey does not recognize the annexation of Crimea and has been openly stating since the first day that this step is illegitimate and illegal. This is a principled stance that has not only legal but also moral foundations, and that protecting Ukraine's territorial integrity, sovereignty, and political unity is critical not only for regional security and stability, but also for global security and stability. And 6 months since the outbreak of the war in Ukraine, children are preparing now for a new academic year while armed forces battle a Russian offensive in the east and the country's economy lies in tatters. As schools prepare to reopen their doors in September, many educators are grappling with the fact that they do not have the ability to provide safety to pupils or peace of mind to parents if their schools come under attack. According to the United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund, it estimates that at least 972 children have been killed or injured since Russia began its invasion of Ukraine. In its child casualties, a June survey by the Ukrainian government estimated that 5.7 million children aged between 3 and 18 have been affected by the war, with 2.8 million estimated to be internally displaced. And on the impact on schools, the fighting has damaged 2,300 of Ukraine's 17,000 schools. That's according to education officials. Some 59% of all schools and universities will not be ready to resume in-person classes in September, according to Education Minister Serhiy Skarlet. And no one knows how many students will attend in-person classes. The war has caused a brain drain of teachers. 22,000 of Ukraine's 434,000 educators have left the country, while many more remain internally displaced. Stay with us. We have more coming up on the Russian invasion of Ukraine, our coverage this morning. Plus, Turkey's president saying no problem with grain shipments as vessels are leaving the Black Sea ports despite the ongoing conflict with Russia. Stay with us. Welcome back. Our coverage continues this morning. Let's talk to Volodymyr Dubovik. He's assistant professor at the Department of International Relations at Meshnikov National University, Odessa in Ukraine. Thank you, Professor, for joining us on the program, and a happy Independence Day to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me.
And how does it feel today? I mean, you're in Odessa. It's received its own fair share of Russian airstrikes. Does it feel like a celebration over there, or it's more like a a ghost town with people hunkered indoors because they're expecting Russian airstrikes today.
Right, it's really a strange feeling, that's for sure. And let me first of all say again, thank you for your congratulations on our national holiday. And also, I watched your very comprehensive coverage of situation around Ukraine and in Ukraine, and that's a very good job. I mean, you basically covered many angles, and that's great coverage that you had. Today, we have first of all an enormous feeling of pride over our national holiday. A lot of people now already call it the Independence War. We didn't have one when Ukraine became independent. Soviet Union fell apart in 1991, and that's how Ukraine got its independence, and other republics of it same way. So we didn't have to fight back then, 30 years ago, but we now have to fight now. A lot of people call it a delayed independence war or war for independence. So we have a pride. We stood tall. We fought back. We provided numerous, countless examples of resistance and resilience, not just military, but not just the government, but average people, the civil society, the people running the trains, the people coming to put down the fires, the people coming under shells, the doctors to help those who were wounded, and everyone else, and people like myself, the teachers teaching when air raid sirens are on, like it is now in Odessa, for instance, the fourth time this this night and this morning. And it's a resilience, and we're proud of it, and we are really valuing this day, the holiday, more than ever before. But also, as you said, of course, it's tense. The war is far from over. We understand that the enemy forces are not far, especially from Odessa. It's basically 150 kilometers away from Odessa. There are Russian troops. So the missiles can come and hit any part of Ukraine, as you said. We are aware of that. So there is a somber alertness of understanding that Russia might actually try to ruin our celebration, especially after some very painful to them, politically painful, primarily and militarily as well, explosions in the peninsula of Crimea that they have occupied since 2014. They're really nervous now about Ukraine reclaiming initiative in this war. And therefore, they try to show again to us and the West and themselves that they can still strike wherever and whenever they can with those missiles, long-range missiles. And that's why we are on alert today. We're waiting for those strikes to come.
Yeah, and lots of teachers have also been impacted by this
Yes.
war. You're an educator yourself. Many students are staying at home. What is it like for you not being in the classroom with your students and not even being able to? I know that the class is holding online, but how effective are those? When compared to when you could actually interact, with students in the classroom, and everything was, more physical in person and more physical for everybody else. We understand there's also a brain drain of educators, people who are fleeing and those who are displaced, that has really affected the education system in Ukraine. What is that like for you?
Right, it's a very good question. I'm often asked this question these days because the experience of teaching in times of war really interests a lot of people around the world. And luckily enough, we had some experience of teaching online because of COVID. We actually went straight from COVID times into the war. That's why we already had this experience of teaching online. The students were experienced as well, and they get used to it. So that helped a little bit, but technically, but not morally or psychologically. Everyone was really down, especially in the early weeks and months of the war, in the late February, in March. I remember I was basically, talking on tears sometimes, doing lectures for my students, and students were somber as well. And they scattered around, and you're talking about the brain drain, but it's not just professors, also students, unfortunately. Some of them have moved out of Ukraine because of the war, and they found themselves a temporary enrollment in European universities or American, Canadian, British universities. But those temporary enrollments could become temporary, not permanent, and that's why we might use some might lose some of those students, and that's a problem for our system of universities as well. That this year, when it starts in a few days from now, September 1st, we will actually find out that many of our students are not coming back to the benches in our classroom. So that's problematic with younger kids, children in the schools like elementary and high schools. There is a mixed system for them. Well, some of them can do it online. Some who are ready and live in areas away from battleground places can actually come physically to the schools. With students, it's also decided by many universities individually. I mean, naturally, if you're living, say, in the city of Kharkiv, which is shelled every day and every night, and not just by missiles, but also by Russian long-range artillery, they're not going to do offline classes. But if you live somewhere in Western Ukraine, you might think about, and that's hundreds of kilometers away from their battleground, from front line. You might think about doing offline classes. So there is a lot of unsureness about, and not quite clear. People are not quite clear about what expects them. Half year of this war is already a long time, but how long do we have ahead of us? No one truly knows. I mean, we only hope that we'll be able to still fight back in many ways, like I mentioned before, and we only hope that the world community and the international community would pay attention and would actually try to help Ukraine in some ways that they can, and they do it now as we speak, because we are the victim. We are fighting for our freedom. There is no guilt for Ukraine in this war. We are defending ourselves against an aggressive, premeditated war waged by much stronger state than ours. So it's a bit of a miracle. I mean, that we are still around, but we are still around. We're not going anywhere.
Yeah, and you spoke earlier about the independence war. You said that this is Ukraine's independence war. The president, Volodymyr Zelensky, has tied back, what's happening now to the annexation of Crimea back in 2014. Do you blame the international community for not doing enough to stop Russia from annexing Crimea?
We do, and also there was also our fault as well, because Ukraine wasn't probably paying enough attention to what was going on down there in Crimea, and Ukrainian government wasn't preparing for this eventuality of Russia using military force to occupy Crimea. I mean, there was some corruption there in Ukraine, still is, which prevented us from doing more, in terms of keeping Crimea Ukrainian. So I'm not saying that's only international communities to blame, but yes, there should have been a more forceful reaction to that particular episode. And actually, quite frankly, the first batch of sanctions on Russia after Crimea occupation was kind of weak and soft on Russia. It actually got stronger in the summer of 2014 when Russian military shot down the Malaysian airliner with a lot of passengers on board. That's when the sanctions got stronger. But the actual occupation and the start of the war of Russia against Ukraine in the spring, late winter and spring of 2014, did not produce sufficient sanctions. And that was a problem. But ever since that time, I particularly try to focus on those experiences and examples of other countries helping us, and especially now, since February 24th, when this massive invasion started, a lot of countries are helping Ukraine in their own ways. Some send weapons, some send financial assistance, some host Ukrainian refugees. Others, come to these forums like Crimean platform, for instance, that you mentioned in your news coverage. So everyone is looking for their own way to maybe assist Ukraine. Not everyone. I mean, some countries are standing aside and distancing themselves and saying, well, we don't know much about this war. This is not our war. We're not taking sides. But a lot of countries, dozens of countries actually, are taking position in support of Ukraine. And we're really grateful, really grateful. If there is some limitation, if there is some restraint that they're showing, they couldn't give more, there must be a reason, and there often is a reason. Financial situation, or I don't know, the people, the public opinion, or something like that. So I personally see this with understanding, and I am grateful for whatever experience we are getting. We're getting quite a lot of it.
You speak about, the financial obligations that some of these countries have given to Ukraine, but for the ordinary Ukrainian everyday life, what is that like? What has that been like during this war? How are you coping with food, with supplies, and stuff like that?
Yes, well, a lot of it is Ukrainian organized, it's grassroots efforts. There's a lot of very strong volunteer movement, NGOs, civil activists who are collecting money. For instance, the other day, people just crowd funded several drones for our military, and then just a few days ago, people crowdfunded a new satellite for Ukrainian military to use to better follow movement of Russian troops, Ukrainians themselves. So the international community, yes, is helping with weapons, which is extremely important, of course, obviously, because it's a very hard, difficult, bloody war and massive war, because we have 2,500 kilometers of a front line with Russia now. But also, like I said, helping refugees, that's millions of people, helping IDPs here in Ukraine, helping Ukrainian economy, because frankly, the amount of destruction caused by Russian invasion is absolutely enormous. It's gigantic. I mean, and it's happening every day. And they're shelling the factories and plants and even fields full of wheat and corn and stuff like that. So of course we are losing money every day, and that's why the assistance that is coming is helping Ukrainian economy to stay afloat, to function, for the pensions and salaries to be delivered on time, and things like that, for the trains to run on time. And that is what's happening in Ukraine. We actually even didn't have a massive devaluation of our currency. Hryvnia, it actually went down a little bit, but not as one would expect with such a massive war against Ukraine. And part of it, again, why is this happening is that Ukrainians are really trying to make it happen, but also it's a result, it's an effect and the impact of the assistance given to Ukraine. So people are not necessarily hungry or don't have access to electricity or water, except for some areas which are basically on the front line, which are shelled daily, and where people are sitting for weeks and months in the shelters and the basements. That's where you have troubles, obviously, with supplies. But that's not a huge amount of cities and towns. Most of Ukraine actually doesn't have much of anything like hunger or people not having basic supply.
Thank you so much, Professor, for speaking with us. And we appreciate your joining us this morning. We know how tough things are there. We do hope you find some sunlight today and do celebrate your independence.
Thank you for your nice words. Thank you.
Professor Volodymyr Dubovik of the Meshnikov National University in Odessa. We quickly turn our attention to the former German Chancellor Angela Merkel, who has been awarded the 2022 Peace Prize from UNESCO in recognition of her efforts to welcome refugees. Now, according to the UN Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organizations, the Felix Houphouët-Boigny UNESCO Peace Prize Award given to Ms. Merkel for her courageous decision in 2015 because of how she welcomed more than 1.2 million refugees, notably from Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Eritrea. Merkel stepped down from power in 2021 after 16 years at Germany's helm, and more than any other topic, the refugee crisis dominated her third term, proving popular with some and unwelcome to others. And it continues to have repercussions even today. In 2015, as a result of wars in the Middle East, particularly in Syria, Afghanistan, and in Iraq, a surge of people fleeing converged on Europe's borders. In a pivotal moment, Merkel opened Germany's borders and famously told Germans, "We can do it," as the country welcomed in hundreds of thousands of asylum seekers. In the meantime, a two-day curfew has been imposed in northeastern Ukrainian city of Kharkiv as fears grow that Russia might attack during the country's Independence Day anniversary today. Head of the Kharkiv Regional Military Administration, Oleh Sniobov, says the curfew started yesterday at 7 p.m. local time. It's scheduled to end at 7 in the morning tomorrow. Police officers patrolled mostly deserted streets as the curfew came into force on Tuesday evening. But shelling could be heard in Kharkiv during the patrol, as city's mayor, Ihor Terekhov, confirmed it was being shelled on his Telegram account. Kharkiv has come under frequent and deadly longer-range artillery and rocket fire since Russia launched what it calls a special military operation to demilitarize its smaller neighbor and protect Russian-speaking communities on February 24. However, Moscow's defense ministry is reporting troops have made advances into Ukraine's Mykolaiv region, a strategically important area in the south of the country. According to the ministry's spokesperson, Igor Konashenkov, Russian and allied forces have destroyed Ukrainian military units defending the town of Alexandrovka and managed to reach the administrative border of Mykolaiv region. The town is Ukraine's Kherson region, which has mostly been under Russian control for months now. It lies on the coast of the Dnipro estuary, through which the waters of both rivers flow into the Black Sea. Kudashenkov also said that elsewhere in southern Ukraine, Russian troops have advanced into Mykolaiv region and taken control of 12 square kilometers. He identified the location of the advancement as near the village of Komoselskoye. Germany's Ministry of Defense, however, says it cannot deliver more weapons to Ukraine without depleting its own stocks, just as Chancellor Olaf Scholz is under intense pressure to keep the arms flowing to Kyiv. Since the beginning of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Chancellor Scholz has come under persistent criticism for his apparent reluctance to gift Ukraine with the weapons it's requested. While Berlin has sent artillery pieces, shoulder-fired rockets and anti-aircraft tanks, Ukraine has asked for more air defense systems and an artillery radar system, both of which have not yet been shipped. Germany's military was in a severely depleted state long before February, with a 2019 report revealing that fewer than 20% of the country's 68 Tiger combat helicopters and fewer than 30% of the 136 Eurofighter jets were operational. Reporters have found that ammunition stocks were low and soldiers were missing. Essential gear, including boots, clothing, and bedding, were also missing. A $75 million super yacht linked to a sanctioned Russian steel billionaire has been auctioned in Gibraltar in what is understood to be the first sale of its kind since Russia invaded Ukraine in February. The Axioma was granted entry into Gibraltarian waters and then impounded by authorities in March after U.S. bank JP Morgan said its alleged owner, Dmitry Pompiansky, had reneged on the terms of a $20 million loan. A 72.5-meter vessel was auctioned by the Gibraltar Admiralty Court. It was listed for 1 day with closed bids to be sent electronically by Monday on Tuesday, according to a court spokesperson. The broker to the Admiralty Marshal of the Supreme Court of Gibraltar, who led the auction, said there had been an unexpected late surge by prospective buyers around the world, with more than 30 flying to Gibraltar to inspect the yacht in person. Given the yacht is being sold through the court, it said prospective buyers seemed to believe they could pick up a bargain. A boat which can sleep 12 people in 6 cabins has a swimming pool, a jacuzzi, a spa, a 3D cinema, jet skis and scuba diving equipment included. Meanwhile, a total of 33 grain ships have so far departed from Ukraine's Black Sea ports under the UN-brokered multinational deal that was reached last month in Turkey. A Turkish foreign minister who said this also noted that the agreement between Russia, Ukraine, and Turkey and the UN has been adhered to without setbacks and that everything is running smoothly. Grain exports from Ukraine, a major global supplier, were disrupted in late February after Russia launched its military operation of the country. But in late July, following the UN-brokered talks in Istanbul, a deal was reached to unblock grain exports via the Black Sea. As a result, shipments from 3 Ukrainian ports resumed on August 1st. And when we come back after the break, football returns to war-torn Ukraine as Shakhtar draw the Metalist 1925. Join us again. Welcome back. Let's get to the business of this war now. Canada has agreed to help Germany with its energy crunch, although few details of exactly how the two countries will work together were provided during a ceremony in Stevensville on Tuesday. Now, instead, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz did sign what they called a joint declaration of intent. It calls on the two countries to invest in hydrogen, establish a transatlantic Canada-Germany supply corridor, and start exporting hydrogen by the year 2025. Scholz was accompanied by a contingent of leaders of Germany's largest companies, including Bayer and Volkswagen, have been touring Canada this week to drum up alternative energy sources to Russian natural gas. The agreement, which Trudeau called the Canada-Germany Hydrogen Alliance, was signed in a town where a company plans to build a large plant to convert wind energy to hydrogen and export ammonia to Germany. But the World Energy GH2 project, which would include 164 wind turbines along the nearby Port-au Peninsula, Port-au-Port Peninsula, has yet to undergo provincial environmental approval, and residents were told about it only in meetings that started in June. Our business correspondent, Amy John McQuarrie, is here to help us understand what the deal is about. Give us a proper summary for those of us who are too dumb to understand this deal that's been going on.
I doubt that. Well, I mean, it's Germany looking for alternative. As we know, energy prices have been skyrocketing with what's going on between them and Russia, the sanctions and all of that. And so they're just looking for alternative. And so they seem to have landed one, even though it's not an immediate one, because
2025
it's a number of years away. Yeah. What are they going to do? And then we're still talking about them winning off Russian gas by the end of this year. And guess what? This also needs money for construction. And we know that the economy is not looking very good at this time. We're talking of recession. We're talking of manufacturers are not getting their products sold because of the hike in the cost of energy. Their products have become more expensive. So we see that other countries are looking at Asia and some other country who now produce at cheaper rates because their energy is cheaper. So that, of course, affects their GDP. We've talked about the forecast for their economy has been dropped and all of that. So this is still a very long way from now, even though we're celebrating it and we congratulate them on this, at least. And it's a good one because it's clean energy. You know, we're talking about climate change
but clean
and all
energy
of that.
is more expensive, isn't it?
Yes, it is more expensive and it's more capital intensive. You know, it is. But I mean, then we also have the cost. For instance, in Germany, because of climate change, their water has been shrinking, and it's also affecting the movement of their ship, which is going to affect trade and affect revenue in the economy. So, I mean, it's all intertwined. Everything is connected. So when you're aggressive about looking for energy, so you turn to coal, and then you increase the dangers of climate change, it also affects other parts of the economy at the end of the day and still affects the economy you're trying to, and revenue that you're trying to protect.
Yeah, and talking about the economy, I see here the euro fell below parity with the dollar. What's that all about?
So normally we know that the euro is normally higher in value than the dollar. So what that means is that Americans will find things cheaper than Europeans because, of course, you will need more dollar to buy what you have in euro. But for the first time in 2020, it happened some months ago, and then it went back.
Yeah, it was the first time it fell.
Yes. So
in
now
20 years,
in 20 years. Yeah. So now it went back again. We saw the euro lower than the dollar, and the dollar has been strengthening since, you know, we heard there was the minutes from the meeting that the Federal Reserve is going to hike rate as long as they need to hike rate because of inflation and everything. So that has been putting the dollar. Yesterday was the first time that the dollar fell in a couple of weeks. So we have seen that the euro, because of inflation and, you know, the issue of energy costs and all of that, we saw that the euro dropped. And then the dollar was strengthening, so that's why the dollar was now more in value than the euro. And for the 19 countries, you know, that use the euro in that corridor, it's not a very good one for them, you know, because they're supposed to have, I mean, when you have the combination of 19 companies and the dollar that belongs to one country. But we do hope it to come back, and since they have alternatives like this, news like this should, I mean, the one that they have with Canada could help them, you know, stabilize.
So very quickly before you head off to Business Morning, the Ukrainian president wants other countries to ban Russian travelers. I guess they're all looking for where to go. Everyone wants to escape the sanctions, I guess.
Yes.
How will that impact, though, on Russia's economy And how will that improve other countries' economies?
Okay, so I think that when you talk about economies, Finland, you remember Finland is one of the first countries that got cut off from Russian gas at the beginning of all the sanctions, and Finland was what? But guess what? Finland has been giving 1,000 visas to Russians every single day.
Interesting.
Yes. So now they say they want to cut it to 100. So what that means that you have about 1,000 Russians going to Finland to spend their money. So what does that do? So Russia and Finland are supposed to be enemies, but I mean, Finland is saying, if you guys want to bring your money, bring it on. You know, the hotels, they are mostly tourists, you know, so they go to the hotels, the leisure areas. So that's good for the economy. But, you know, President Zelensky is not happy about that. He wants them to be tied up and let everybody feel the impact of the sanction, and then so that maybe that would stop the war. That's President Zelensky's stance.
Yeah, and he has more threats coming. Today being its Independence Day. Thank you so much, Ini.
Thank you for
I
having
look
me.
forward to your show at 10 o'clock. I'm okay this morning. Didn't make any mistakes. To some more cheery news now. Ukraine on Tuesday launched its new football season despite Russia's ongoing invasion in an apparent attempt to give a morale boost to the war-ravaged nation. In the first match of the Ukrainian Premier League, Shakhtar Donetsk drew goalless with Metalist 1925 from Kharkiv at the Olympijski Stadium in Kyiv. In an emotional pre-match ceremony, the players of both teams and the referees entered the pitch wrapped in Ukrainian flags and unfurled a banner read, "We are of the same courage." The Shakhtar players wore T-shirts with the inscription "Donetsk, Ukraine will win" over their plain jerseys, while the players of the Kharkiv club wore similar T-shirts with the inscription "Kharkiv, Ukraine will win." And that's where we leave it on the program this morning. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubadi. You have an update at 5. Join us again.